Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. It's a Friday night that we're doing this interview, and I just want to give you all a heads up in case you hear a little bit of notes wafting through the sound that there's a party going on in my backyard. Not mine, but the next house, which is kind of par for the course on a Friday, which is often the funeral day. So I suspected it might be a funeral. So that's just a little bit of a Ghana background. And so we're back in Africa, even with my guest today, who is an international development professional focused on Africa and the intersection of gender equality and economic empowerment. She is passionate about social entrepreneurship that fosters the creative economy on the continent and also builds opportunities for job creation. She's the owner of A Few Good Things, an online store with the aim of highlighting talented African designers whose work has sustainable and ethical production practices at its core. And as a complement to A Few Good Things, she has a startup enterprise, which is called Atelier Mbachu, with a focus on building an inclusive value chain for fashion accessories. Tina Mbachu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. So tell us first off, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Good question. Yeah, so I was born in Cameroon and then relocated to Canada in my preteen years. I came to Canada with my dad. And when we first came to Canada, we lived in Toronto for about a year and a half. But after that, we relocated to the French part of Canada, to Laval, a city next to the Montreal area. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Montreal. So we lived in Montreal and I kind of grew up there. But the question of like where I'm local is a little bit tricky because I feel like I've lived in so many different places that have become local to me. So I've lived, in Ottawa, Montreal, Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Gatineau area here, like in Ottawa region. So those are all places that are local. I'm currently physically based in Toronto, but all of these other places sort of are part of like my weekly experience. Yeah, I would say I'm local to a few of those places.
Okay. And what is your craft? How would you describe your craft?
My craft. Yeah, so I guess I would say that my craft is just creating programs. So creating programs and initiatives that empower the, I guess, more vulnerable amongst us. So primarily women and youth. So creating programs that enable them to be able to kind of get to that next stage of their life economically and socially as well. So I've done that within the nonprofit space and also within the private sector space as well.
Okay. You gave us a little bit of background on how you came to be living, working, and playing where you currently are. But let's take a little bit of a switch because you mentioned Europe as well as North America. So tell us a little bit more about how you came to be where you were your first time leaving North America or Canada after emigrating from Cameroon.
Okay, so when I immigrated, like when I came to Canada, I grew up here, I stayed with my dad. But at the time, and still currently, my mom lives in Europe. So my mom lives in the Netherlands. So I would go.
Oh, okay. Got it.
That's the connection. So usually, so if I'm in the Netherlands, it's because I'm visiting my mom. And I did my master's also in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So I would go there very often. I have, some of my best friends are still living there. But the period of time that I would say I spend, usually when I go, is for a very short period of times. But between 2013, 2014, I lived there for about 12 months. I was doing my master's there. So I think that was one of the pivotal moments for me because that was the first time also that I had the experience to go to South Africa and did like a research with farmers, rural farmers in like a very small village in the north of Limpopo. And that sort of really started I already had the passion before, but I think it really cemented my passion for really like the informal economy in general. But yeah, so I started, I guess, more in my adult years going to Europe around like 2014.
Tell us a little bit more. What did you study when you were in Amsterdam?
Yeah, so I did my master's in international development studies, and it was sort of, I focused on environment, development, and conflict as my track. So it was a very interesting intersection. It was a 1 year program that was very intensive. So it was very interesting just having a combination of economic courses that are, not your like typical traditional economic, like development economic courses, but really encouraging you to think about alternative ways of organizing economically. So that was one of the courses that I really liked. And I think that really made me appreciate the program a bit more. And then the practical component of it as well. Like I spent 3 months in Chakuma, this village in Limpopo. Yeah, and just being with these farmers. I think I spoke to over 150 farmers for the 3 months that I was there. And just really, talking to them and just understanding how they're being innovative in their day to day, despite limitations that they're experiencing. And, whether it's in accessing inputs or whether it's in the actual business of running their farm and, selling their produce and thereafter. And of course, I think then it just really stood out to me that the question it wasn't a question of they're not producing enough or they're not, whatever the challenge might be. Actually, the question became, why is it so difficult for those who are operating within the informal economy to be connected to the formal economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were producing in surplus. Like I was holding cabbages that I had to hold with my two hands just because they were so heavy. But they couldn't sell them in the market because now everybody's going to the supermarket or whatever. And even if they did go to like the local market, they were producing so much that they couldn't sell all of it. So they were actually having to throw out some of the produce that they were making because it would go bad and things like that. So I think that's when I really started thinking about how do we link the informal to the formal in a more systematic way.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of goes across sectors for me. So whether it's agricultural, artisan economy, or just kind of within the informal sector in general.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because you mentioned environment, and we're now what I think the end of week one of the COP26 climate
Yes.
conference. And so, I was listening to a program, and the environmental mascot, so to speak, Greta, she had said something like, "Oh, the COP26 is just big nations, blah 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 blahing," right?
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in your perspective, because we have the world powers reprimanding or, tisk to Russia and China for not showing up, et cetera, et cetera. And so what are your thoughts on that? Like what is the place of something like that, and how relevant is it really for Africa?
To be honest, I am at a space where I am thinking that this sort of platforms are really not relevant. They're
Yeah.
not going to create massive impact for us. I think that all the funding that goes into organizing it could be put into actual action. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that some of the people that invite as guest speakers should not be given those platforms. Right.
Mm.
I know, like, I think there's one environmental activist that I follow on Instagram. She's sort of like more a slow fashion space, just in that space a little bit. But I was following her work, and she was talking about how they have, like, I didn't actually follow the summit actually, just because I'm so, like, right now my brain is just like not there. I don't see
Yeah.
the relevance of them anymore, so I don't really actively follow. But she was talking about how, I guess, they invited like a senior executive from Shell to talk about environmental issues, and I was just like, does not align, right?
Right.
Like, we know Shell is one of the worst polluters, especially when we think about the African continent, we think about countries like Nigeria, we think about,
Mm-hmm.
the impact that they've had in local natural ecosystem. And then to give them that platform to talk about what they are doing to reduce environmental footprint, I feel like it's just sort of a slap in the face for a lot of those communities that are still going through these issues, where Shell is really, and many other companies, like, they're not really responding to those issues. But here they are, right, in this global platform talking about environmental sustainability when they're not putting that into action.
Right.
So I guess just going back to that question, like, I don't see the relevance of it. Like, it's not, and not just this, but even a lot of the summits that we hold nowadays, right, whether it's around World Economic Forum and all the other, I think it's just really, I guess, like the
Just
phrase,
show, not tell.
yeah, I was gonna say just to show face, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, I think if you're really action oriented and really wanting to solve these issues, then you should be thinking about how to direct all of that finance to actually solving the issue versus having another summit to discuss how you can solve it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I absolutely kind of agree. Like, I'm not in that environment or what have you, but every time I'm hearing about these things, I just realize we have a broken policy infrastructure, we have a broken implementation infrastructure, and by doing these things, we are just feeding what I call the TV show, which is
Mm-hmm.
the media that has a narrative that has been by the shells and the global
Yeah.
corporates to say, oh, our business is inherently bad for the environment. But I think there was some talk about being off of fossil fuels in the next 30 years or something like that. But that's
Mm-hmm.
against their existential
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah.
So how can you ask those people? It's always asking, the criminal to police themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I think, and I think it's maybe it's part of a larger conversation too. And I think it's part of why I have slowly moved away from more like the traditional development space
Hmm.
and sort of now more into the private sector and seeing how I can leverage private sector for social impact, right? And looking at different business models and things like that. Because I think that the way that we've been engaging in development, like you mentioned, is drastically broken, whether it's in terms of first how we're even having these conversations. A lot of the people that are impacted by development issues are never really on these platforms.
Hmm.
When they are on the platform, you often see that they are there to just talk about their own experiences as sort of like the marginalized person. So they don't even have that, I don't want to say agency in that sense because they do have agency in a way, but they're not giving that full dignity in a sense, right? So let's say if you're organizing an event to raise funds for gender equality and you have someone who's been a victim of FGM, fine, they're wanting to talk and raise funds for that, right? But often within the international development space, that's the only time that that person is giving a platform,
Hmm.
whereas they could be giving a platform multiple other times. So why use that story? Why leverage the story only when you actually need something as an organization or when you want to be able to show that you're doing something the right way, when on the day to day, that's not the norm for you.
Hmm.
So I think just seeing a lot of that and realizing that in as much as a lot of these conversations are happening, things are really not going to change because there's no incentive for the system itself to change. So, so I might as well find other ways of trying to create impact where people actually might have a means of doing things better for themselves. And one of that way is economic means, right? So for them to be able to have access to revenue and then make those decisions for themselves.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into just kind of for us to understand what motivated you to get into the international development space in general.
Yeah, good question. So I have thought about this quite a number of times, and I think I always go back to growing up in Cameroon. I had a good life. I was privileged. I went to school. I had, family around me. I, never went without food. So I had a good life. But there are people around that, were going through hard times, right? So you can see someone who you have your peers when they come to school and then their shoes like broken or something like that, right? So I think from an early age, I always question why that was the case. Why did some people have and others don't? And then when I started thinking about how to make change, I remember earlier in my early adult years, I was more into, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make change in politics. I'm going to get into politics. That's how I'm going to make change. So like from 18, like I think 18 to 21 years old, like I was, well, actually 16 to 21 years old. I was like this super activist person. I'm like, I'm going to get into politics, diplomacy, create change at that level. And then I don't even remember the exact scenario. And I was just like, yeah, politics is politics. If I go in there, I'm going to be swallowed in. And it's not going to be the space for me to make change because it's just politics is politics. It's not there really to create change for the global mass. And then I remember just sort of like looking towards my end of CIGEP. So in Quebec, we have a different system where after high school, you go to like CIGEP. So CIGEP is like a college for 2 years, and then you go to university. So after like my last year of CIGEP, I was just like looking at like international relations program, and I'm like, I don't think I want to do this. It sounds really fun, but I don't see what I could tangibly do with this. And then I was looking at economics, and I'm like, I don't really like math that much, so I don't, so I don't want to do that either. And then somehow I came across this international development program at the University of Ottawa, which was really great. And then they had a bilingual offering, right? So because I'm bilingual, so I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So that's how I read, the intro to the program. There's a lot around economic empowerment. There's a lot of around food systems. There's a lot of, conflict and private sector and development and all of those different things. And I think that's when I started thinking, oh my God, okay, I can actually do this. I can do this. I can make impact. I can travel and, and work in different parts of the world, but do something that is creating impact for others outside of myself and outside of my family.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I kind of got into international development. I finished a program in 2 years. I don't know why I was in such a hurry, but it was 3 years. I finished a program in 2 years, and then after that, I went to Amsterdam and I did my master's there as well. But yeah, I think since then, I haven't really looked back.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That seems like a common theme is from a very young age, people that get into this, they've just seen it and they are dissatisfied with the inequality and want to find solutions. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think to a child's mind, right? Like if I go back and think of myself as a child, it doesn't make sense, right? Like
Yeah.
if you go to work, your parents go to work, they should have enough, like they should be paid enough to take care of you. So why are they not paid enough to take care of you? Or
Mm-hmm.
why are they not selling enough to take care of you? So as a child, you don't really fully understand that, especially if you see maybe your peers, like their parents are doing it and they have a car and they have houses, and you're like, but like, why are you not doing it? So you don't understand a lot of those systemic issues or market failures and all of those things. So it just it stuck to me really from an early age. And yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Mhm.
So I'm curious about where in Cameroon, because we know that Cameroon has the English side and the French side. So
Yeah.
tell me more about Cameroon here,
Yeah,
where you're from there.
I'm from the English part of
Okay.
Cameroon. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
from the English part. Yeah. So, but my family is bilingual. So, like, I was born in the Anglophone part. My
Okay.
dad was born in the Anglophone part, but I do have a large part of my family that's Francophone as well.
Okay.
So they're based in the Francophone part, and then others in the Anglophone part. So I think primarily also because my ethnic group is primarily French speaking, but
Okay.
because my dad's parents, my grandparents lived or they had somehow moved to the English part of the country, that's where they were living and working. So we kind of now have that bilingual mix.
Okay. So when you say
Hmm.
bilingual, it's French English.
French and English, yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
uh-huh.
Yeah, we have like on my dad's side we're Bamileke, so it's like from the grassfields part. So where my ethnic group is Bamileke, it's one of the dominant groups, and ironically also it's often referred to as like the
Oh,
group that's
okay.
really savvy with business, like right, like they're very entrepreneurial. And to this day, I have not met a single Bamileke person that is just doing one thing, right? Like either if they're a
Yeah.
professor, they have a business, or they're doing whatever else. So they're very, very entrepreneurial, very sort of like go-getters in that way. That's when we talk about positive stereotypes, I guess that's one of the
Uh-huh.
stereotypes that's usually associated with Bamileke. And then my mom's ethnic group is a little bit different. So yeah, she's Douala. So yeah, so it's a bit two different ethnic groups.
So is hers from northern region, southern region?
Yeah, South.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got
she's
it.
from the southern part. So yeah, so she's Anglophone, so she's from the southern part of
Okay,
Cameroon.
got it. Got it. Okay. So this is good segue into my Glocal Speak question. So this is where I ask you to share a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you came to value it as Glocal Speak.
Okay, I think this is a good one. So I actually have two that have become part of my everyday language or everyday speak, so to say. I've traveled quite a bit to Swaziland and Tanzania, and in both places, I think I picked up some cues that I still use still today.
Uh-huh.
While I was in Swaziland, the thing that people always say, oh, like yebo, and yebo just means yes, right?
Okay.
So
Uh-huh.
but even till now, when I am like talking to someone that I am very familiar with, and this, like they're saying something, it's like, "How are you doing today?" I'm just like, "Hey, boo," and they're like, "What does that mean?" But like, it's just become like I say it now without even thinking about it.
Uh-huh.
But I use it in a way now where it's like I'm good,
All is
things are
well
good,
kind of
all
thing.
is well.
Uh-huh.
And then the other one is I picked up in Tanzania is pole pole.
Say it again. Bole cole?
Pole pole.
Pole pole. Okay.
Yeah. And this one, I say more to myself than to people. Poly, I say to myself because you know how like in the West, like we're very like, okay, everything needs to be fast. Like, like you were all about productivity and like speed. When I started traveling to Tanzania, I just was like, okay, everything is very like,
Yeah.
it's very like slow paced.
Yeah.
And I remember some of the partners that we were working with at the time, some of my colleagues there would just be like, Pole, Tina, it will get done. It will get done. Don't stress. It will
Uh-huh.
get done.
Uh-huh.
So I say that to myself now. Like if I'm working on something and the deadline is like super tight and I'm getting stressed, I'm like, Pole, Tina. So
Yeah.
yeah. So those are two things that I picked up that are sort of like my part of my day to day.
Okay, nice. I like them. So Yebo and Pole Pole.
Yeah.
So from the south and from the east of Africa.
Exactly.
Okay, nice. So let me now give a little background. So I came across you because we're both on a WhatsApp group called Black Women in Development,
Yeah.
and you launched recently your new business. So
I
tell us, yeah,
did.
congratulations on that. We're excited to hear. So tell us more about it. Tell us more about what you're doing now and how you're.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. So I think it's been a long journey. So I think maybe I'll give you a bit of context as to how I just decided to launch the platform. But a lot of my work in development, as you know, is or has been really focused on economic empowerment. So there's been a lot of programming around SME development, entrepreneurship training for youth, for women, vulnerable women across different sectors. Again, artisan, economy, agriculture, different spaces. So I've really worked in that space of even creating like an organizational strategy for economic empowerment programming. So throughout that process, I was just always curious about the role, like how can we leverage SMEs for empowerment, right? Like for economic empowerment for vulnerable groups. How can we ensure that the social impact aspect of wanting to ensure that vulnerable groups have access to income, it's an integral part of a business model. Like you're not just in there to generate profit, but you're also thinking about the people that are making the products for you, or the people that are working for you. So thinking about different models, business models, whether it's employer ownership model or whether it's just sort of a social, like a general social enterprise type thing. I've been doing that for some time. And then recently, as I mentioned, I transitioned out of sort of more traditional development space and actually got into tech. So I have been working in tech for some time, past couple of months, I guess, where it's one of the top incubators in the world where I'm really creating programs again for founders to start and grow their businesses, leveraging a lot of my experiences, but also my own entrepreneurship journey to support them and create resources for them. And one of the programs that I'm actually running within that, so I'm leading the Black Innovation Program at our organization. So we're primarily working with Black founders. And one of the initiatives within that is a social impact stream. So working with founders, getting them to see how they can really bring out the social impact aspect of their work, whether it's waste management, whether it's reducing food waste locally, whether it's working with refugee women. So just working with a lot of these groups, the small entrepreneurs, and just again giving them that mentorship on a one-on-one basis, getting them to kind of think about some of these things that they're not necessarily thinking about, right? So they're thinking very business, but they're not thinking about, okay, yeah, it's not enough to say this is my mission, but how are you operationalizing that mission, right? Like how are you making sure that in terms of, let's say if you want to empower youth, how are you doing that on a day-to-day in terms of your business operations? So I noticed that a lot of the founders are not really thinking about that, and they're not thinking about measuring their social impact. They're not thinking about reporting their social impact. They're just thinking, this is what I want to do, and then I'm just going to run a business,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah.
So I noticed that gap, and I thought, okay, like there is a lot, there's a lot to do, whether locally or even working with founders, different parts of the world, and addressing different issues. So I'm like, okay, I have a lot of this resource, I have this knowledge, I've done this, and I have this, I guess, unique position of having been in both spaces, right, in the business space and in the nonprofit space, and I can really, really match both of them together for social impact. And I thought, let me launch like a mentorship program where I can work one on one with founders, but do it so in a way where it's accessible, right? So I just launched with the initial one-on-one 1 hour session. So founders can just book a one-on-one like hour session if there's something more strategic that you want to talk about. And then based on that, we can decide if we want to be able to do maybe a quarterly mentorship program or an annual mentorship program, depending on your need. But yeah, I think I launched the program just really observing that there's a lot of gaps out there in terms of how people think about business and social impact and how they combine both, and making sure that it's fully integrated. It's not just two isolated things.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the organization you're working with. So the Black Innovation program, and where is
So,
that out of?
so that's at the DMZ at Ryerson University.
Okay.
So the DMZ is one of the, I guess we say, one of the top incubators in Canada, but also globally. We've always come out as one of the top 10. We've pushed out companies that are global. They've gone out to raise VC funds and scaled to the US and scaled internationally. And every time when I look at a Black company coming through, right, whether they're coming into let's say if they're coming into a boot camp, because we have different programming, right? So we have boot camp, we have fast track, and then we have incubator. But boot camp is more sort of like your early stage, and you're sort of refining, like trying to figure out the development of your MVP. And then fast track, you already have an MVP that's developed. It doesn't necessarily need to be a market, but it needs to be fully functional and has that potential to go to market. And then incubator, that's when we're really having a strategy for you to go to market and position you for VC funds as funding opportunity as well. So I think within the Black Innovation Program, we noticed, again, there's a gap, right? So a lot of the companies that come through, not only where I work, but in a lot of this tech incubation spaces, a lot of the companies that come through don't look like us. And the companies that do look like us have a harder time getting into the room. I see it, right? Like we look at applications every day. I know what my peers are thinking, what the feedbacks are that they're giving around this company. And I'll be like, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but there is a huge market here. For example, let's say if there's a company that's in financial technology or in the remittance space, and fine, it's saturated, but they have a special offering. And we can say, okay, this special offering is not in the market. Can we incubate them so that we can get this to market? So there's always a lot more resistance around these types of companies. And the goal with the Black Innovation Program is really to build the capacity of Black founders, and be able to create that pipeline for them so that they can get into our incubation program. So they can get access to funding, they can get access to mentorship. Of course, it's not easy, there are always challenges there, but I think that's a start.
So you, in that role, are the pre-prep. So you're getting people ready to then funnel into the other programs that then give more access to more markets, more funding, more resources.
In a sense, because so essentially also the Black Innovation is a stream. We have to think about it as a stream across all the DMZ programming, right? So we have, as I mentioned, we have bootcamp, we have fast track, and we have incubator. So I work with companies along those three streams.
Sure.
So we would create, let's say for fast track, let's say right now I'm building the fast track program. So we're having the first cohort towards the end of November. The goal of that is we want to be able to position Black companies so that they can get into incubator.
Got it.
And what that means is, again, we're looking at a combination of workshops, we're looking at mentorship, we're looking at what do they need to have in place? Do they have agreements, sort of like shareholder agreements in place? Do they have, in terms of when they're ready to go out and start seeking funding, do they know how much equity they want to be able to give away? Are they resistant towards giving equity away? If they're resistant towards giving equity away, then they're not a fit for incubator because, again, if you're wanting to raise fund, you have to give parts of your company away. So just sort of having a lot of these conversations, looking at the legal part. Do you have all your documents in place? Are you thinking about all the tax benefits that you can have as an incorporated company, right? If you're doing research and development, are you thinking about some of those tax benefits that you can have back from the government? Are you thinking about recruitment, building your team? How can we support you in that? And then the other key piece is the product itself, right? What's the product that you're developing? What do you need? What kind of support do you need to develop that, to finalize that product? And is it a product that is scalable? That's one of the main things as well. Is it a product that, if you put in front of a VC and the VC can say, okay, I can see myself investing in this and generating profit out of it. So there are a lot of questions that we consider. And oftentimes it's hard to have to say no to companies just because we don't necessarily see the fit in that pipeline. But what we can do and say is within the network, let's say if there, because in at the DMZ as well, there are different zones, right? So there, let's say if you're in the creative space, I would say if you're in fashion, there's a fashion zone. If you're into supply AI or supply chain, there's a supply AI program. So there are different programming. So we're always looking for where does this founder fit. He might not fit for this program, but maybe he fits into another programming. So we kind of always think about it in that way as well.
Mm-hmm. So particularly looking at startups or founders that are looking to serve African markets, right? Are you
Mm-hmm.
finding that there's more I mean, I'm assuming there is, but what is the resistance that they face and how are you coaching them to be able to access and get
Mm-hmm.
into those markets and continue with their vision for whatever it is that they have for Africa or, another less developed economy?
Yeah, so we do have a lot. Like at the DMZ, we have companies that are applying from different parts of the world, right? They're applying from Nigeria, they're applying from Ghana, Ukraine, and all of those different countries. But one of the key things is if you're applying to the DMZ, then you're trying to get into the North American market,
Okay.
right? You're not necessarily only looking to work within the Nigerian market or the
Sure.
Kenyan market, or
Sure.
you're trying to get into a more global market.
So you kind of
So
have proof of concept in your own market before you're moving. Got
exactly,
it.
exactly. And sometimes that could be a good thing, but it could also be a really negative thing because what's innovative in the African market
Yeah.
is not innovative in the Western market,
Right.
right? For example, let's say if we have a company that is creating a platform for those who are interested in tech to learn about coding, yeah, like you're learning how to code using Python or just like teaching others, right? So like a knowledge sharing platform, right? That might be unique because you're sort of in a sense democratizing knowledge on the continent. You don't have access to have an entire degree, but you can take a course and build your competence in that way. That's huge in the African market for people to be able to do that. And there's a large market for it if you look at the youth demographic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the West, not so much.
Yeah.
So it's harder to get companies like that. It's harder to kind of get them programming because, again, if we think about the VC side of things, are investors going to fund them? Most likely not. Yeah. So companies like that, companies in fintech, as I mentioned, companies in the remittance space, as I mentioned as well. So, I think that there's been a lot of success. It's kind of, I guess, a two-pronged thing in the sense that it's been a success where we've seen some companies succeed in like the knowledge sharing space for specifically for tech education, but at the same time it's harder for other companies to kind of get into that space as well. And I think particularly in the Canadian market, it's even more challenging because Canadian investors are very traditional,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they will be more traditional than American investors who are quick to give.
Mm-hmm.
Canadian investors are very, very traditional. They're really, really beyond proof of concept. They already want to see you,
They want to see the money. Like, where's the money?
generating revenue. And you're like, well, I need investment to be able to generate this amount of revenue that you
Right.
want me to generate, right? So
Yeah.
it's always that challenge, but particularly in the Canadian space, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. That's interesting. In terms of where you find yourself finding the most rewards, I noticed that you have coaching services, and so tell us about that process of becoming a coach. And
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you see that you immediately know, like this is going to be a successful entrepreneur, and this is going to be something that
Yeah.
needs coaching out?
hmm The first thing I always look for is someone who is coachable. You have to be
Mhm.
coachable, right? Like you can't go out and say, "Oh, I need support in building my business and doing this," if you're not receptive to hearing what the other person has to say, or if you're very defensive of what you've already accomplished so far.
Yeah.
Right. So there might be companies, fine, you've developed a prototype, it's great, you've generated revenue using that prototype, but you're stuck. And your coach is telling you, okay, but like you need to do this. And you're like, yeah, no, 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 but this has worked for me so far, but it's not working anymore. Right. So I think one of the things is that if you're not coachable, that's already a dead end.
Yeah.
So we can't work together. The second thing is someone who is also an implementer, right? So I'm going to coach you, but I'm not doing the work for you, right? At the end of the day, if you want to be able to have 10 new, whether hosted clients, I can give you tips and things like that on how to approach them. But you have to do that work. I'm not going to be approaching them for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to think about your social impact messaging, how to communicate that to your customers, and do you even know who your customers are? Sometimes a lot of founders that I talk to, they're like, everybody. Like, no, your customer is not everybody. That's the
Yeah,
first mistake,
exactly.
right? So it's just thinking around those things, right? So are you going to implement what we are talking? Because let's say if you book a program and I'm meeting with you every week, once a week for an hour, and every week it's the same story. Oh, I didn't have the time to do this. I understand things can happen. Like some weeks you might be too tired, or you might have things that sort of come out of nowhere. But if it's consistently, oh, I couldn't do it, that I couldn't do it, I couldn't do that, then it's like, what's the
Yeah.
point, right? So you have to be actively wanting to implement what we are discussing, some of the strategies that we're coming up with, and then that's how we're going to learn. Like, is the strategy working? Is it not working? Okay, then how do we reinvent the wheel? Like, what do we do next to try and see that we can move things forward? So I think those are the key things that I look for, both in my job when I'm mentoring founders, but also when I'm doing like my one-on-one coaching
Mm-hmm.
as well. Like recently I spoke to a girl and like she was just like, oh my gosh, I never thought of this. I never thought of this. Okay, okay. But it's just sometimes it really helps like
Light
having
bulbs
that
go
other
off.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I often do this, so forgive me because I asked two questions at one time. So, you as a coach, how
Mhm.
did you find yourself in that space?
It's interesting. I've had a lot of people reach out to me
Mm-hmm.
for mentorship even before I launched the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not something that I had even thought about. Like I would just, someone was like, through LinkedIn, for example, I get a lot of emails on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Say, oh, I'm thinking about this. Can I talk to you to like just get your feedback or your advice? So I would start like, next thing I know, like it's a 2 hour conversation and we're talking and, so I do a lot of that.
Okay.
And then also even just in life, right? So like, let's say, for example, one time I'd gone to a networking event in Montreal and just talking about entrepreneurship and for two young graduates and young students who are trying to get into the workforce. And a bunch of them came up to me and they're like, oh, yeah, I have this business idea. Like, what do I? And then I started talking to them outside of that space, right? So, even just outside of before kind of launching the platform, I've just had a lot of people reach out to me seeking advice around this. Sometimes it's people who are also within the international development space that
Mm-hmm.
are wanting to launch like their own product company, where they're working with artisans in basket weaving or textile and some of those different products. And then they'll, because they know like I've worked in that space, so they would come to me and seek advice on what to do and just sort of run their ideas through me and think about what would be a good strategy for launch. And then also others who would just reach out to me on LinkedIn and just sort of ask, like, I've been thinking about this business for a while. What do I do?
Got it.
So that's part of that journey as to why I thought like, okay, let me just think about this coaching thing
Yeah.
for a bit. And then the second part, which is what I mentioned earlier, was also even within the social impact stream, talking and mentoring founders and seeing that gap, that there's actually a
Mhm.
gap in terms of bringing that social impact into
Yeah.
the business. It's not just saying, oh, this is a social impact, and then you run the business, but you have to be accountable to that goal,
Right.
right? You have to have systems in place to be able to track whether you're achieving it and then reporting on it and whatnot. So just thinking around all of those things and the gaps and all the inquiries for mentorships that I get. And yeah, so that was essentially it brought everything together.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Nice. So I want to pivot to my mindset hack question because I think this is a good point in
Mhm.
transitioning. So, what is your favorite or an innovative mindset hack? So that's one that you can imagine, one that you practice, one that you know of.
One that I practice, I would go with one that I practice. So
Hmm.
I don't know if this is going to sound weird, but I think sometimes I think as humans, we often, even if we're doing amazing things and we're working and we're like successful in our careers, or we just seem very positive, like outwards, we often doubt ourselves, right? Or we often think, oh, I'm not doing enough. Oh, this could be better. Like we just have a certain level of expectations of what we should be doing. And I often notice that in myself. So what I do is I try to, and I think this is also really influenced by a book that I'm reading right now, but I try to get outside of my thoughts, right? So it's like I'm observing my thoughts as a third person in a way, right? And then that way I'm observing the pattern. I'm like, okay, listening to what I'm saying to myself. And I'm like, yeah, but like, if I'm hearing myself, if I hear my mind going, oh yeah, but you could have done that better. And then my mind, and then I'm like, the third person is observing my mind. That third person is like, oh yeah, but you did it anyway. It's like, why are you doubting? You did it, and this is a result, right? So maybe it's not perfect, but you did it, and you can grow and improve as you're. So I think it's essentially it's just being mindful of your thoughts and being able to observe your thoughts in whichever way you.
Without judgment.
Exactly. So, but I think for me, just kind of taking that step where I'm sort of able to sort of pause and observe like what I'm thinking and what I'm saying to myself. That's something that has really been helping me.
Nice. That's a good one.
Mhm.
Right. Because I think you're right. I think as humans, our first instinct is to, I guess, I don't even know why we do it, but it's to be question and doubt and not celebrate our
Yeah.
victories as much as, it's like, well, it's okay. And so I think, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that goes with your pole be
Mhm. It will
patient.
happen slowly.
Yeah,
Be kind.
exactly. Okay, so you
Mhm.
mentioned that you're reading a certain book, and so we've talked about you as the coach, the serious person. So I read somewhere
Mhm.
that you love sushi, and that your
Yes.
and that your favorite color is sky blue. Tell us something more about the Tina that's not the coach or the social impact champion.
I think, yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think, because even so yesterday was a friend's birthday, and her partner was just like, I get very annoyed when I go on your LinkedIn and it's sustainability, sustainability. Can you talk about something else?
But that's what LinkedIn is
So,
for.
so it got me thinking, right? It's like, okay, but what are the other sides to me? I'm a creative. I love being creative. I think I thrive on creativity. And with Atelier Mboka, a lot of the products that I've been working on, I designed those products myself,
Oh,
right? So I
nice.
think
Yeah.
being able to express my creativity is really, whether in product or even just like in creating my own space, like how I live, and even, yeah, just how you present yourself in general as well, and just being creative around that. I think that's really important to me. I love to travel. I love traveling. I love experiencing different cultures. So the last 2 years has been difficult
Yeah.
not
I
being
can
able to
imagine.
travel, right?
Yeah.
Because before that, I was traveling at least 4 times a year.
Yeah.
So it's been challenging not being able to travel, but hopefully we'll get back to that
Yeah.
very soon.
Canada's kind of one of the most hawkish countries where this is concerned. Like, are you all in a lockdown, out of a lockdown? Where?
So we're right now we're out of like in Ontario. I can't speak for the other provinces, but
Okay.
Ontario and Quebec we're out of lockdown.
Okay.
But in a lot of places, like you do have to show proof of vaccination. Let's say if you wanted
Mhm.
to go out dining,
Yeah.
you have to show proof of vaccination, which some people are sort of against, but it's to each his own. But I think we were in and out of lockdown for quite some time, and I think
Yeah.
that was taking a toll on a lot of people.
Right.
But now, people are traveling a little bit. Things sort of seem to be getting back to some kind of a normal.
Okay.
I'll be traveling in December, so I think it's exciting again for me in that way. But I think, yeah, things are getting back to normal. Some universities, as of next year, will fully be, or I think they're saying 85 or 95% capacity in person.
Okay.
Yeah, so majority, yeah, so things are getting back to normal slowly. So yeah,
Okay. So would you consider yourself a reader, a watcher, or a listener?
I am both a listener and a reader.
Oh.
Yeah, a watcher, not so much.
So what are some of your favorite reads lately?
So right now, I read a wide array of different types of books, right? So
Uh-huh.
right now I'm reading a book. It's called True Love, but it's a meditative book. So it's a book. I don't know if I can pronounce his name correctly, but it's this writer. He's a Buddhist monk,
Mm.
but it's Nat Thich Nhat
Okay.
Thich Nhat Hanh.
Hmm.
So the book really talks about, or sort of, it's a practice for like awakening your heart. Like, how do you awaken your heart so that you can be your best self for yourself, but for the people around you, right? For your parents, for your partner, for your friends. And it really comes down to learning how to be present. So that's essentially what he's talking about. So how do you make sure that you're fully present on a day-to-day basis
Hmm.
with those that that you interact with. So it's been a really great read. I'm reading it also as part of a book club. So I had to join a book club because I noticed that I was falling behind on my reading. I used to
Sure.
be a huge reader. Like when I was young in my teenage years, I was just, you would never see me without a book.
Yeah.
But I think like as you get through university where you're reading all of this like technical heavy textbooks
Yeah.
and whatnot, you kind of fall off the reading track, like
Yeah.
just reading for yourself and reading for fun
Exactly.
and for pleasure.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get back into it, and the book club is really helping in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Nice. And what about good listens?
Listens, I listen to a lot of music as a
Mm-hmm.
default.
Okay.
I listen to a lot of music just to kind of, again, get my mind into that space of whether it's relaxation, or whether it's just bringing more joy, whether it's just wanting to get into a dancing mode. Sometimes I listen and I'm dancing in my apartment, like, so just creating your own energy in different ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love listening to music and some podcasts, but I haven't, to be honest, actively listened to podcasts in a while. It's more predominantly been music.
Yeah.
And recently, I've been listening to a lot of. I have different playlists on my Spotify channel. I have some playlists for sort of like when I'm working. So when I'm working, those are more instrumentals. So a lot of like instrumental hip hop, like slow funkadelic instrumental type genre. And then if I am wanting to dance around, or I'm doing laundry and or cooking or doing whatever around the house, and I just really want to just create that space of just being lively. There's definitely some Afrobeat that will be playing around. Some Afrobeat, and yeah, just Afrobeat. I love Kisamba as well. So
Oh
usually it's a
yes.
combination of
Yeah.
either Kisamba, Afrobeat.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. Okay, cool. So we'll have a link to that book in show notes and a little bit of, if we can get Tina to give us a link to one of her playlists, we'll do that. Or we'll just give you some links to some Afrobeat
Absolutely.
and
Yeah,
Kizomba
absolutely.
songs. So this has been thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm so happy to have met you and to really kind of get a new lens on social entrepreneurship and how it's a sector that needs attention, and someone is paying attention and making sure that we have well trained, well coached entrepreneurs that are emerging on the scene.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me.
Mm.
It's been a great conversation as well.
Thank you. So, do you have any last words for our listeners before we go?
I guess no, not in that sense. But what I always generally say is just think of different ways that you can create impact in your own surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
Very small ways, right? Like if you love fashion, if you love environment, if you're very environmentally conscious, you want to reduce your footprint, thinking about how you can consume more locally, thinking about all of those different things. But yeah, just kind of think a bit about how you can create impact in your own local space, how that aligns with your values, and just being a bit more intentional in how you consume, the businesses you support, and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, be more intentional about you
Mhm.
and your place in this space. Wonderful,
Exactly.
wonderful. So, where can we find you, Tina? We'll put that in the show notes. But where can we find you? Where are you on your socials and your website? Give us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I have my website, tinambachu.com,
Mhm,
and I am on Instagram as well,
mhm,
tina.mbachu on Instagram.
mhm.
Yeah, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Tina
Okay,
Mbachu.
wonderful. But and also, what about your?
A few good things. Yeah,
Mhm,
so a few good
mhm.
things. I have it on Instagram, but the website is also a few good things.ca.
Okay.
So there's that. Yeah, and actually for that, I'm also part of an incubator, which has been really interesting, just kind of getting that business to the next level as well.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's also on Instagram, a few good things a few good underscore things on
Okay.
Instagram.
Okay.
But if you go on the website, then there's the
It's
Instagram
all
link
there. Okay.
there. It just takes you there.
Great. 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 So we'll see all facets of Tina in the show notes.
Yes.
All right. All right, listeners, this has been another episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And as always, we have new episodes each Tuesday, and you can see them or catch them at www.glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So subscribe, like, share, tell a friend. We love to hear from you, recommend a guest. It's all good. And so until next time, bye for now.